Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me at another story which doesn't exist. There's no such thing as Macra. The groundbreaking opening titles get something of an overhaul here, keeping everything which made them unique, with just a couple of alterations to account for this now being a new era of the show. And one major alteration: the Doctor's face now appears. The shot of Troughton is perhaps the best of all the opening titles faces. It gives a sense of him knowing what's to come, what we're about to watch, and imparting no secrets. I know what's coming, it says. You don't, though. Subsequent ones eschew that ambiguity and, in my opinion, lose a little bit in doing so. Or maybe perhaps Troughton's just got the best face. We don't get new music yet though, for that we have to wait a little bit longer. But I can't deny that being presented with the new titles does reinvigorate the viewer. Even knowing that they're coming and knowing exactly what they look like doesn't detract from the impact when you've been watching the same ones for 152 episodes. When they finish, we're thrown into what I think is one of the most atmospheric... Realised I hadn't lit the TARDIS up. When those titles finish, we are thrown into what I think is one of the most atmospheric Doctor Who stories yet. Where most get their chills from alien wastelands or dreadful creatures, of which this story's got both, the Macra Terror gets most of its ambience from enforced fun, and I think that is supremely chilling. Perhaps it's the introverted misanthrope in me, but enforced fun always seems incredibly suspicious. I've never understood why at parties people who don't want to dance are harangued at length to dance. I don't want to dance doesn't mean I'm not having a nice time. Don't impose your fixed parameters of a good time onto mine, because you're going to ruin my night by taking the fun out of it, and you're going to end up ruining your night because you're not going to have any fun trying to make me have the fun I'm already having. It's a minefield. It's also perhaps why I find this story as unsettling as I do. The song they all sing about being happy and obeying is just as creepy to me as a Dalek gliding along a corridor or the Cybermen advancing across the tundra. I'm impressed that even as we enter Base Under Siege season on Doctor Who, it still finds new ways of giving the audience the creeps. Watching people blindly follow what their governing bodies say and happily ignoring facts for alternatives and, falling for jingoistic turns of phrase in a cynical media, all of that only enhances the unease I get watching the Macra Terror in October 2023. There are no such things as Macra. Anything that says anything to the contrary is fake news. I shudder. It's very effective when the controller pretty much screams that early on. Another alarming moment in quite a long line of them. Almost immediately afterwards we have the tape play to the colonists at night.
The sleeper must relax and believe. Everything in the colony is good and beautiful. You must accept it without question. You must obey orders.
It's all just wrong. Jamie's onto the sinisterness from the off, as is the Doctor. Sure, there's some fun to be had as they all get makeovers, but it's notable that it's both Jamie and the Doctor who aren't comfortable with theirs. Polly gets a new haircut and Ben gets pampered, whereas Jamie feels uncomfortable about what the lovely ladies are going to do to him, and the Doctor gets thoroughly de-scruffed, of which there are heartbreakingly no photos. And while I understand it from a budgetary production point of view, it is a shame that the animation also doesn't include it. Anyway, he promptly scruffs himself back up again. It's a really enjoyable sequence, made for me by the Doctor's wonderful line.
Oh, my shoes!
Oh, they're fantastic! You can see your face in them!
Precisely. Who wants to see their face in a pair of suede shoes?
And while I do understand its exclusion from the animation, I really still wish they'd done it for obvious reasons. It means that the animation is missing some of what helps set this story up so well. It wasn't out the last time I marathoned, and so this was the first time I'd seen it. It is impressive, I think, and makes the Macra attack on Ben and Polly a far bigger in scale and more palatable, but...
Get off me, man! It's got my phone!
What it loses feels like a little bit too much for me. It also means that Polly's had her haircut from the very beginning, and as great as the animation is, this is another story that I watched twice. Once with the animation because I'd never seen it before, and then the recon. And the recon, despite the Macra attack on Ben and Polly not looking as good as it does in the animation, I still think that it's the recon which gives a fuller experience of this story. As the jolliness of the colony, which really should have been called the Jolony, plays out in Welcome to Our Travellers, we're also introduced to Medok, who is super keen to escape. And he keeps babbling about creatures, and it's all set up really, really well. The Doctor is dropping hints from the off that he knows something is amiss, accurately describing creatures from reports he's heard, and, lest we forget, what he's seen on the time scanner at the end of the previous story. I think one of the reasons it feels so wrong, and by that I mean wrong in the way the story intended, is it's almost like an infantilizing of the society. The happy songs are one thing, but once Ben gets hypnotified, he's constantly reinforcing the severity of insubordination, but he's sort of using childish language to do it, like, you'll be in trouble. The whole thing feels very primary school, and the subjugation of grown people through making them fear being in trouble is quite disturbing in its childlike simplicity. Even later on, the Doctor is cheekily telling Ola and the pilot to apologise to each other, but talking to them as if they're kids.
Say you're sorry, Ola. Say you're sorry, pilot.
The Doctor has always been a subversive presence, even when in grandfather mode as Hartnell, but this Doctor has a livelier energy, and here that subversiveness is ramped up that little bit further. He derides the song for its rhyming structure, he questions why the leaders want everyone to be the same, he promotes free will as loud as he possibly can, encourages the breaking of rules, flouts the rule of the curfew, gleefully sabotages the readings of the pipes in a scene that reminds me of the trashing of the lab in The Savages, and not only admits his sabotage, but takes great pride in it. A brief clip exists of the Doctor talking to the brainwashed Ben, and Troughton is excellent in it, telling him that the voices may not be right. Now, I've sort of held off saying this because, as I said in the previous video, the object of this exercise is to view every story that the marathon happens to be on as the present tense. But Patrick Troughton was always my favourite Doctor as a child. In marathons, I find it takes a little while for him to usurp Hartnell, which is always a disconcerting experience, watching my favourite Doctor but not liking him as much as the previous guy yet, and it's an odd feeling. But I always liked it, precisely because it's the charm of marathoning. Anything can change. And even though anything can change, and I'm not ruling out the fact that I may well prefer Hartnell this time around, I do think it's this story, the Macra Terror, where Troughton begins to catch up. Considering how affecting I find the premise and the execution of the story's central tenet, the overthrowing of the colony via the simplest propaganda, then the Doctor's equal and opposite reaction to it means that his current incarnation wins me over here far more than he has done up to this point. When the curfew is enforced in episode 1 and the controller bids a
"Happy sleep time, everybody,"
to everyone in the colony, and the Doctor spits back,
Same to you.
it's wonderfully defiant, and it also gives the impression that the Doctor is on it and he's got this in hand, which makes up in spades for the moon base. When such an oppressive regime has such a jolly facade, the Doctor is all the more effective in using his silly exterior to hide his impressive cunning and intellect. So, in the Macra Terror, Troughton really has an opportunity to stretch his legs and show us what he's capable of, and that's an opportunity he seizes. Obviously, Ben is more susceptible to the mind control, not just because of the assumed suggestion that he's from a military background and used to following orders, but mainly because the show is so very clearly favouring Jamie at this point. Craze is very good at it though, and it at least offers some different beats for Ben to hit. When Ben struggles with his programming as the story goes on, Craze is probably the best he's been since he joined Doctor Who, and when he manages to shake it all off and muck in to save the day, it really is a punch the air moment. And Polly gets that haircut. She gets to go down to the mine and help both Jamie and the Doctor, but her most enduring relationship so far has been with Ben. And that he spends so much of the time under the influence of the Macra, she gets some decent interactions with her changed friend, but once again comes off feeling like the most sold short of the three companions. Emerging as the strongest of those three companions is Jamie. He gets to do nearly all of the heroics which would have usually been split between himself and Ben, and his crowning moment thus far comes when he emerges, bedraggled, to interrupt the cheerleading practice and is mistaken for one of the dancers. Hyland flinging himself out of the door is resourceful, quick-witted, and a little bit facetious. Everything a companion should be. This is another story which I'm struggling to liken to any that has come before. The creatures, what little we see of them moving, don't hold up all that well unless you're watching the animation, but they are really effective when it's only their presence which is felt. The reveal of the real controller is a great cliffhanger, even if it kind of does mean that the Macra are giving themselves away for kind of no reason. And do the Macra hold the record for longest time between debut appearance and reappearance? Anyway, while there are elements which prevent me from saying this is a flawless slice of Doctor Who, and while I do think that the premise is greater than the execution, this is a story I enjoy very much. We get another hat for the Doctor, and after 156 episodes, our regulars leave the story by dancing out of it. What better way to end a really rightly wrong Doctor Who story? Jamie's dance audition. Unfortunately, the Macra which grabs Polly in episode 2 doesn't really pass muster. As ever, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this makeover of Doctor Who, then you know how YouTube works. Please do give it a like and share it around. It really helps massively, and I would be super grateful. Thanks for bearing with. Almost missed out on some uploads for a couple of reasons, really. I always have them recorded ahead of time, but part of the reason why I couldn't record for a really long time was because I've got a really poorly dog. But she's very shy, but she's actually doing all right now. Ah, good girl, good girl. Yeah, yeah. And what do you think of the Macra Terror? Is it as successful, as unsettling as I think it is, or does it leave you cold? And do you prefer the animation, or do you favour the recon? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for Ben and Polly's farewell. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, check the departure boards, and I will meet you in Gatwick.